Hello, my fellow voyagers, and welcome to Soul Specs, Healing Abyss. I am your host, Ja. So, we're going to jump right in. Today's topic is intimidation. I think most people understand intimidation as symbols of how someone maybe looks or how a present maybe feels, and then they interpret that emotion into something outside of themselves. And what people need to remember is that intimidation is simply an emotion itself, right? Where anytime we feel something about anything, it's coming from an emotion that's attached to something that we have observed, that we have physically learned through tactile interaction, or again, it was a bit of both. We observed something in the midst of something, but it happened to someone else, so that we learned through their emotional state of being at that time, right? So intimidation is simply something that we have observed, something that we watch, something that we learned. Some people watch how someone reacts to a certain thing, and even though they've never actually encountered or experienced that thing, once they come into contact with it, now they're acting as if they have a reason to be intimidated by it because they saw something that may look like them and experience it, and now they're afraid of it. This is anything you see in nature. If you see a baby alligator and a baby alligator watches an adult do something and they learn from them and they see, oh, don't do that, they realize that in that moment they should be intimidated. This is a point of survival for us. It's important to understand what are survival mechanisms and what are things that are now becoming a hindrance to us. So when we remember that intimidation is an emotion, and it's how you feel about something's present. It can be someone, but something's present as well. This is when we start to begin to create restriction. Restriction is anytime you feel something inside of you just make a quick pulse. It's just like a pulse of just stop for a minute, like a hard pause. You feel it because you can feel yourself either creating mental energy that indicates you are trying to purposely stop it. Like, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look at it. Or I'm going to try to hide this thing and pretend that no one else can see it. I'm going to lie, right? These are restrictions that are created by the human. Now, if we say, okay, I see this thing, I don't know what it is, I don't know how to interpret it, but I'm going to keep calculating and just making sure that I stay safe without reacting. This is flow, because flow understands that fighting the current just makes you go down faster. And so it's easier to just let go and go with the flow. So for me, what I've understand on this journey of soul consciousness is that if your soul is insecure, right, about its past and its past lives experiences, it's going to carry that confidence or insecurity over to this now present human avatar life that we exist in. And so this viewpoint opens up discussions about the psychological aspects of intimidation, right? As we're exploring why and how individuals may feel intimidated in various situations, but is it necessarily something that they should be intimidated by? I feel our ancestors were well trained and well versed in that because they had to be. And since we became more sedentary, we became to a complacency of not really paying attention to what is intimidating and what is survival and what is us just making up insecurities, right? Because insecurities make us stagnant. It prompts the questions about the roles of perception and subjective experience, because how those subjective experiences shape the things around our emotional response and reactions is then what becomes that understanding of the psychological part, right? All the mechanicisms behind intimidation that creates a place of feeling lack. Because let's just think about it. Anytime you have this energy, because intimidation captivates me because it's unspoken, it's unseen, right? But you feel it. Because I can look at two people who are dressed identically alike. I can see them in the exact same situation, but one just has a presence about them that feels like don't mess with me, right? That intimidation factor. That is the soul. And that's why I think most humans, when we talk about soul and spirit and consciousness and ego, we automatically attribute it to the human flesh. And we don't think about the energy that play around us, that works through us and allows us to have this physical reality, right? Because fear, power, these are all dynamics of fight or fight. Simple as that. When you become the focal points of your own investigation and you start asking yourself, why is this something that bothers me? Or why is this something that I feel I should be bothered by? Then you start digesting and unpacking that stuff we talk about from childhood. When you can start seeing like, oh, this was given to me because my parents were actually trying to help me survive in this situation. I am no longer in this situation, so I therefore no longer need to act or respond this way. I can adapt. This is in that moment of taking 2 points of experience and merging them together into that tertiary aspect. That's the wisdom part. When you can always find a way to get to wisdom, you close out a cycle. So sometimes you're going to have to fall on your face at least once or twice so that you understand why you got that outcome. And when you understand the outcome and you actually understand the process and you integrate it back into your understanding of it's not about finding blame, it's about understanding how to overcome, you get your wisdom point. And then this is where you start understanding again that the process that contributes to the perception of intimidation is usually shaped by anyone's emotional state of conditioning. I always say imprinting and conditioning are the same thing. So if I go back and forth between those words, they're the same definition for me. But in this instance, conditioning and imprinting is when, again, you walk into a room, your mom sees a spider, she screams, she hates spiders, they're so gross, they're so icky, they're so whatever. As a child, you have no idea because this is the person that you look up who protects you, or hopefully does in that situation. Let's just imagine it's a protective, loving parent. That child's going to trust that parent's reaction and then grow up hating spiders, right? And they're going to have the same possible reaction, reflecting their journey through their own journey, and then they get triggered by some random influence because of a first-hand experience someone else had, but they take it on and contribute it to their own emotions. This is where intimidation is born, right? Someone tells you, don't go to that neighborhood. Why? Trust me, you're just like me. We live in the same area. We kind of have the same mindsets. You don't want to be by those people. They'll make you feel like this, and they'll do this and this and this. Some of the information's true. Some of it's not true. Again, it's about our own understanding of self and what we can handle. But I ponder how past traumas and cultural backgrounds and social conditioning have shaped how we see the world, because each of us have our own cultural background understanding of who we are, as well as combined societal conditioning that we have to adhere to when we're together. And then we have our personal traumas. This is what we call susceptibility. And when we are put into situations where we don't have a choice but to learn it, I implore people to explore more research and study. Just go back into your own family tree history and then look at what was happening during that time that they were living and go deeper into the research and the mindsets of where you came from, because that's inside of you, right? That's our own personal history molded with our ancestors' perception. And then they create this world where we pass this type of confidence on. And depending on if your culture was bred to believe it should be confident, it will be confident, or it will become petty and take it out on other cultures. And now I'm not pointing out any cultures in particular, but I think we can all figure out where it goes. This has been the history of cultures where it's a certain culture by another culture feels intimidated for some reason. And because of this, they come in, take over, or they create genocides against each other because of intimidation. And it's cultural intimidation and societal intimidation. That's why we have to remember that cultural and societal influence on all of our experiences comes from understanding why societal views are what they are. Because what we're saying is we understand that we're all humans and we have to act accordingly sometimes so that we know that we are about peace, love, empathy, right? Of course we can create chaos. Of course we can create war, but is it necessary? And so intimidation is usually only used when you're trying to gain more ground. And so if our only existence in this life is to keep fighting each other over territory, then we as an existence will not exist very long. And this is why over evolution, new species, other things come to life and are born. And that's just how it works. And if we want to continue to be a part of that, we have to continually think about how we respond to situations that make us feel like we can't help but consider the impact of cultural and societal influence when it comes to identity, because we get it. That's who we are told we are. It reinforces a level of confidence as well. I'm tall, I'm African descent, I'm a confident person. I get that. I'm proud of that. But also, I know that that's my human flesh. And they should be proud of who they are because that's who they are. My soul, it's the same, is a feminine energy. Very masculine and driven, but it's a feminine energy. It's much more nurturing. It just wants to help as best it can. And that's when I realized, okay, well, my soul confidence is knowing that I'm a nurturer by trade, right? I have to own those, because if I don't, other souls will see that and they will use their avatars to manipulate you to then drain your energy. When we talk about energy vampires, this is what happens when we don't have confidence in our own identity, because confidence and identity go hand in hand, and that's what influences what we call intimidation. And so it becomes clear that these factors significantly contribute to how we're going to decide how we're now perceived, based on fashion, based on how we talk, based on, again, the attributes of what is power, right? What are these dynamics of intimidation that makes someone stand out, that makes other people feel like don't mess with them? All of these nuances, they're of other people's societal standards, but it's also just an emotional choice, right? Because standards are a choice, and we emotionally have to say, like, here's why we want these standards put in place. That's where it becomes a point of, if you're creating too much restriction or rules around how you want society to feel about what makes you feel not intimidated, that's where you'll get pushback, right? We're saying it all through the news, everyone has their right to feel how they feel, but when people are just screaming at cashiers and all this stuff for no reason over a product and service that they're choosing to go get, they could walk away and go to a different store, but they're choosing to remain in that situation and create restriction. That's when you can see that there's no soul confidence. In that moment, that's what the lack of soul confidence is, because they go hand in hand. This implies that restriction literally is how one feels about another's presence, just for them simply existing. And so you have to start asking yourself, when you get into these situations and you start asking about personal boundaries, what boundary do you feel was crossed that now is going to influence the external factors of one's emotional state, right? Because if you're going to get to a point of yelling at someone over a chicken sandwich, you got to ask, what are your boundaries that you feel have been crossed that are now influencing you to act out an external way that everyone's looking at you like, wow, okay, so this person doesn't have much self-insurance. You got to understand your inner strength to understand that self-assurance is like, okay, listen, everything's not going to go our way all the time. You don't want to get upset at someone for literally just doing their job, right? But when we're not connected to our soul's confidence, and then we don't have confidence in our avatar, it's going to show. And then it's going to affect, again, how other people decide what their self-worth is, right? If you don't know your self-worth, you're going to not have confidence, and then it's going to lead you into not understanding what your own boundaries are. And so this is one of the things where it's very significant to understand that you can either train yourself to ask questions so that you can understand how to maintain a space of boundaries for yourself so that you can protect yourself from the unknown boundaries of other people's external factors that trigger them, right? Because we don't really know what's going to violate someone's unspoken expectation. Like if someone gets set off, they get set off. There's nothing that we can truly do about that. So this is where we have to do that exploration of self and then consider the relationship between our own expectations and our own personal space and our own emotional well-being, right? Because nurturing for the notion of self-confidence promotes us to go into the conversations about self-assurance. And when we have that self-assurance, it's easier to actually speak to the mind, because the mind is always going to ask questions and it's not always going to get the answers directly from us because we, as the avatar, don't know ourselves. So you have to literally ask yourself, who do you feel you are? Speak to yourself. Who am I? You can't feel, and there's always going to be that imposter syndrome when people are like, well, you're talking to yourself. No one cares. You can say whatever you want to say. As they say, be delulu as you must. Because you are in your own mind. You're in your own kingdom. No one can tell you what's a lie or what's truth. So you have to define what's a lie and what's truth, right? That's your decision on what a lie and a truth is. For me, I know that my energy is from royal descent, and they are very keen to everything, and they understand who they are, and you have to respect them. That's how my soul wants to be treated, so I just let my soul do that. My body, same thing. If I'm walking out in public, I understand I am of royal descent. No one can talk down to me. I do not care how anyone feels about me. I'm going to do what I want. And when I mean do what I want, it doesn't mean going out and disrespecting other space. It means I don't need validation to feel safe in my own space, right? So this is, again, you got to do you teach yourself how to become that person, right? Or do you just play a character that you're told to be still? Because the thing about what most people don't realize is they go out and play a character, talk this way, act this way, say you went to this school, say you have this job, this is where you come from, this is the state you come from, so now you have to represent this state for the rest of your life, and you got to represent this area like it's like you're like, yes, we're tribes and that's where we come from, but that's still not us. So you have to start asking yourself, you're already playing a character, so why not play the character you want to play? Huh? You know what I'm saying? Why not play the character you want to play? So how you have confidence is going to be how you have self-worth. And then this is cultivated, again, from asking yourself real questions, not just bypassing them because you can. Because exploring the factors that, again, contribute to your inner ebb and flow, whether it be positive or negative, is always going to influence your ego perception. The ego perception, for me, is what I call it belongs to the human. The ego is the human. At any point in time, however people describe it, that is fine. But from what I observe, anything attached to the ego is human, and it is not bad. It is us. It is who we are as the avatar, and we have to respect and love ourselves. But we cannot allow the ego to believe that it is the soul's thoughts. In my opinion, when we have random thoughts that just come to us that are aha, that is the soul's thoughts. That's why people are like, how did I get this? You didn't. It went through the source ethers, and the ethers went through the soul, which is connected to the spirit, and spirit talks to soul. And if you are open enough through your third eye, then when the spirit talks to the soul, sometimes the avatar can hear it and the soul can't. So if you have a really healed avatar where you've done the work, you've cleansed yourself, which is, again, a discipline. You don't have to be perfect, but having a discipline of taking care of your health, your body, your environment, your finances, all that stuff, it's important because that is taking care of the avatar. That's keeping it alive. And that's part of the major part of the video game. You got to keep the avatar alive, right? And so when you do that, it keeps the body aligned enough so that the soul can have its time to now go back and reflect through all its past life issues. And it can clean them up and use any wisdom now that it's experiencing through the physical avatar ego to say, wow, they conquered something that my past lives could never get through. Awesome. Now I can go to the next level as a soul and ask it questions of my past life emotions. And this is where spirit and soul and the ego all line up and you get your aha moments. This is when those intuitive psychic hits, whatever you want to call them, come through and you just know. And can't nobody tell you nothing because now you're aligned, you're listening, which becomes the soul confidence. And when the soul is confident, it is no longer dumping its past life feelings and emotions on the ego. Because a lot of us are like, why do I have these deep, dark thoughts? Where do they come from? Who do they belong to? Just know they don't belong to you. And you don't have to tell everybody that. I'm not saying like if you feel you need help, don't get help. But some voices are necessary to hear that don't mean you have issues. It just means you hear exterior voices that are connected to something outside of your own ego that you created. And so now your ego is willing to get help. So it's allowed itself to open a door to another part of itself. And may it be what someone wants to say is, oh, well, now the mind's just creating all this and you're just making it up. That's fine too. As long as you have a narrative that creates a blueprint to how you operate in this universe so that you can stay on your path and not get distracted or distorted by others, is the training, right? The training of the human brain is not to believe that everything the soul mind thinks is going to belong to them. The soul mind is unconsciously going to feel. And that's what we feel as the human when you can sit there and say, what are these thoughts? These are not my thoughts. This is not how I feel, or this is how I feel. And then the soul is able to say, this is how I'm actually feeling. You don't have to interpret this into your own human because we're sitting in a room watching TV by ourselves. We're totally safe. So you have no reason to be in survival mode. You have no reason to be intimidated. The human goes, thank you, soul. I will relax and let you work through this. And then in that moment, the soul works through whatever it needs to work through. And what this looks like is when you just out of nowhere start crying, right? You're just sitting there, everything's fine, and you just start crying. That's the soul catching up to itself. That is the soul finally saying, I don't have to feel stuck because I'm not trying to keep this human alive. Listen, if we don't pay attention to that part, the human's job is to grow, to take care of itself so that the soul can continue its journey on its soul path. If the soul is always watching the human through trauma and trying to work it through trauma, it will start to hate itself. And that's when we start feeling hate against ourselves and depression because one of us gave up on the other and we don't want to participate anymore. And now we have to realign our trust to trust each other. And it's hard to do. It's hard to pull your body back when the soul doesn't trust the mind and the mind doesn't trust the heart. And now you're just going against your own free will and creating your own chaos, right? This is why I say, you got to know who you are truly in order to do this spiritual game. Because it's a game. I don't care what anyone says. It's a game. It's fun, but it's scary because it's a real avatar. It's a real Squid Games. And so you have to pay attention to every little thing you do, but don't make it become something that like is obsessive, right? Like when I say pay attention, when you're walking, you're paying attention to every little walk. Hopefully you're not just walking blindly and fall. I mean, well, some people do, but again, I pay attention to where I walk. So even if it's consciously or unconsciously, I'm paying attention to every little thing. And that's when it's much easier. Because when you're paying attention, you actually slow down. It seems like you're overly processing, but you're actually slowing down because you're focused on one thing. And there's always something going on around you, right? Because that's when it's then these said thoughts of the soul are interpreted into the human feelings. And then that's how we start to either act out or feel we think we are. And then people label us. And then we either choose to ride out that label and connect it to our own and say, well, this is my tribe, and now you're part of this subcategory of existence. Or we ask ourselves, is this something that is true to me and how I see myself? Because I've started to learn about what people perceive as intimidation is simply their own insecurity about insecurities. Like you have to be, that's what insecurity represents. You have to be insecure to be insecure. And so remember, these are given to us. They're not innate. We're not born with insecurities. We talk about it all the time when kids just come out knowing who they are. Knowing who they are. But over years and years and years of being indoctrinated and beat down, they start to understand that maybe that's not who they are, right? And they start believing whoever they're told to be and possibly feel and need to act like. And so this is when I say it's that mirror reflection when we say do mirror work, because when you do mirror work, you see your avatar. Every single day, I always say, without a mirror reflection or someone telling us what we look like or a picture, how do you know what you look like, right? How did we know? We didn't know. So when you have the opportunity, use that mirror to get realigned with yourself. It really is a beautiful exercise to remind you that, yes, it's you are me and I am you. And what we really feel about ourselves or what we want others to think about us is from a reason of a filtration system, right? Everything about the brain is a filtration system. And so sometimes it is hard for the filtration system of our mind and our ego and our emotions to connect sometimes because we're removing the original source. And so by the time it gets to us, it's a version of that energy that's not all there, just its fragments, right? And that's when we can start misinterpreting people's presence and start saying like, oh my God, well, they're dressed this way or they look like this and their face is not smiling. So that intimidates me. And it's like, okay, well, it intimidates you. That's not a bad thing. Their presence their existence can't make you feel so intimidated that now you're creating all these disadvantages or being condescending or being discriminatory against this person because they're simply existing in a state of whatever thing you categorize as intimidation is, right? That's trauma. And this is why it's important to understand that we have to detach from that. We have to understand that we are okay to remain that energy of who we are and allow others to work through their own behavior. I'm not saying you have to accept everyone's behavior, but this is where emotional intelligence work comes in. And you have to understand and be able that when you work through your emotions, you're now working through shadow work because you're going to go into emotions that you tried to put away and bottle up. You're going to work through trauma because that's going to bring up, that shadow work is always going to bring up that trauma because it's like, I don't want to feel that feeling because that feeling's attached to that trauma, which opens that door. Again, you don't have to go all the way deep into it, but it's best you walk through it. As you get older, it's the only way. I wish I could say it an easier, nicer way and walk you better through it, but honestly, it's a self journey of it's confidence. When you have the confidence to say, you're not going to break my soul, you're not going to break who I am now, that's when you can work through all that trauma work. You know, it's not going to go away, but that doesn't define your past. And that's where you start looking at past life work, because then you can start understanding like, wow, this is probably what my ancestors went through. And they had it even during a harder time, right? And this is what connects us back to being that human, because we can care enough to understand that all of us have experienced this life. And then that soul consciousness kicks in that makes us a collective conscious. And that's where we're now currently existing as we're experiencing this new awareness. Because here's that physical plane where we get to learn, we say, that we call Earth. And as much as I personally feel it takes too long, but I'm also a soul that's always been in a rush, that's what my body is learning, where it's like, there's no rush. My journey around this time is there's no rush. And so I have to respect that. And when if we try our best to not interfere with our gut intuition, the soul universe will always line up to our knowing of who we are. And it's the most beautiful thing because, again, we as kids, we already knew, but people tried to take it out of us. And so as adults, it's our job to give it back to us, you know, because no matter what it is, if someone said anything you loved as a kid that someone thought was stupid, just please go back and reflect on it. Go back and just see why it ignited you. Whatever that energy was, see why. You know, why did you enjoy it so much as a kid? Because I kid you not, take that time to play Because I promise you, when you go back and you really just figure out why you really wanted to feel that way, you start to figure out it was just a space of safety or joy or comfort. You know what I mean? Like, it's your place of creation. I'll put it that way, because when that pure spice of imagination, even if people are looking at the act as stupid, sometimes the act is not about what it is. It's like scrying. You're just using your imagination to create something that you see that no one else can see. And so that's when it's important to not let people or your own, first of all, don't intimidate yourself, because other people feel intimidated by your dreams. But most importantly, again, stay connected to yourself, so that when you see energies trying to intimidate you, you can say, no, this is my imagination. You're not going to bully me out of doing what I like, right? That's when you feel exactly what you're supposed to feel. Be that heart, mind, soul connection. And then the body understands that everything is okay. And then the body then trusts the soul. And the soul's like, okay, I'm willing to keep creating with you. I'm willing to keep reaching out to source, because now we know how to handle each other, because there's always going to be many layers of protection around soul energy. If we're saying that it's from many, many lifetimes, then we have many, many souls, and a lot of them don't want to work through the energy. It's just like a harmed animal who finally has to learn how to trust its new environment. If you become that protection by correlation of just existing together, you got it. You won, right? The point that we feel about this, anything that we do with this discussion, is intimidation is only created when we don't trust our soul. So yes, there's human levels to this. There's science out there that we can connect to it, but I just wanted to jump straight to it. The point of this discussion was knowing that we might not always understand someone's energy, and we may not always like someone's presentation of their energy, but it is always really cool to take the time to just think, maybe that's a trapped soul that is just torturing itself, right? And from its past lives, it's just not allowing its human to have its own experience now. So that human and ego have to now live that trapped soul's past lives over and over, and that's what causes trauma. And so again, I don't try to make excuses for people, but I also do have empathy, and it's like, everyone doesn't know their journey. And so until they know how to work through it, it's about us who do have the confidence to keep standing in our own self, in our own empathy, who can't see themselves yet, and just be a beacon, be that light, right? Because I will always protect those who can't see themselves as best as I can, but not if they're going to harm all those around us. I want to give them space to see themselves and feel themselves. That's important. Definitely not going to be on someone's side if they're trying to destroy someone's character. But I can also see where they're coming from too, so I hold space for them as well. That's all it's about. Sometimes you don't have to confront people. It's just about holding a little space, so that when you allow yourself to go into that spiritual journey and back out into the 3D, the human knows how to exist and knows how to survive and thrive. The 4D consciousness, they then can be awakened, and it can go on its journey and beyond. That connects us to our higher self, which is then connected to source energy. And that's what it's all about. This is what it's all about, because at the end of the day, we will all pass, and we'll go back to our maker. And we just have to remember and understand that we are greater than this body. We love this body. We love who we are. But our soul existence is going to go beyond this body. And we have to remember that through this explanation and through this exploration, we're going to keep uncovering keys to building an enduring human, an enduring ego, a strong soul, and a happy spirit. Have that confidence that aligns you with all that you truly are. Because remember, we are all just specks of the universe in soul consciousness. Thank you.